So I'm going to shift now on just what we teach about the responsibility of the receiver. We talked about how everyone is on the same team, and saying, again, don't feel bad. We're all on the same team. You're going to be doing the same thing for your colleague that you're asking them to do for you. So try not to think of it as a burden, but just something that needs to get done to take care of the patient. Be very clear about what needs to be done, and avoiding phrases like, it'd be nice if you could. But then at the same time, only hand off things that actually need to get done overnight, right? So we don't want to create extra work if we don't have to. Always try to remember people to not get locked in, right? Anchoring bias is real. So we are giving guidance and anticipatory guidance around what we would do for a patient based on what we know about them. But it's always important that when someone is on call, they evaluate the patient before taking action. They consider what was recommended by the outgoing team. But then they have to make their own decision. Like, do I do what the team said, or do I do something else because I think this is a totally new problem they hadn't anticipated for? Because that's what we get paid all the money for. But it's really important to remind people that they need to not just follow it blindly, which is easy to do, especially early on in intern year. So we are all different types of learners, right? There's visual learners, auditory learners, tactile learners. I encourage people to try to use as many of those facilities as they can. So, you're obviously talking and doing your auditory sign out. If you're looking at your paper or the screen sign out, then that gives you the visual confirmation. And then for tactile learners, it's really helpful to take notes as you go, whether you're writing on paper or taking notes in a text box in your handoff, or updating the information as you go. That is really helpful and kind of helps solidify information. But the most important thing is read back and recap. And it doesn't have to be long, but it's really important to help solidify that information. And I love showing this example because I don't know if I can say how many people have been to Starbucks lately, but maybe people have been to a coffee shop lately. And I won't make you all unmute and talk, but what happens when you go to Starbucks and you give your order? What do? The barista.
They repeat it back to you.
Exactly. They repeat it back to you. And then what do they do after they repeat it back to you? They repeat it to the barista. And then the barista repeats it back to the person at the cash register. And then on top of that, they write it on your cup. So there are all of these different checks that Starbucks has put into place to make sure that, God forbid, they don't get our coffee order wrong. And we would be really upset if they got our coffee order wrong. We don't even do like half of this in the hospital usually, right? We're learning from it. We're learning from what business has learned a long time ago. But I think we're a little bit behind the 8 ball, but it at least helps us, I think about why it's so important to read back. And again, you don't have to read back everything, but at least kind of recapping what is the highlight that we needed to know. So again, try to empower the receivers. It is okay to be assertive as the receiver. And what I mean by that is if the person who's signing out, so like in the video that we made, the person wanted to leave, right? Like we all want to go home. And reminding them like, look, let's just take a moment. Let's sit down. If you don't mind, let's do this in a quiet place. Don't be afraid to ask someone to slow down. Similarly, don't let the receiver rush you and say, I have to go do this admission. Like it's really important that you kind of slow down and take your time to talk about the patient. And don't be afraid to ask someone to pay attention. Also, don't be afraid to ask questions and repeat. I will be the first person to say that I zone out all the time when people are talking. I am not an auditory learner. Even as an attending on rounds, I repeatedly will have to say, I am really sorry, but I didn't hear the last minute of what you said. Can you please repeat it? And, we're all human. So I would much rather fess up to the fact that I zoned out and I didn't hear it and have someone repeat it rather than actually miss that information. So kind of humanizing the fact that it's okay to do that is helpful for learners. And then importantly, again, if anyone is uncomfortable, they should be empowered to get people involved, come to you guys as a chief residence, have a very easy way for them to do that so they're not scared about it and they don't feel bad about it. The point isn't to get anyone in trouble. It's just, let's make sure we're doing the right thing. Otherwise, I tell them, eyeball sick patients early in the evening. It's really important to have a baseline clinical status for patients so that if things change, you know how they changed. And then write events in an update. So some things are major and they need to be an event note in the chart, but not everything needs to be an event note in the chart. But it is important to at least write down what happened for the day team when they come back, whether it's a medication change or someone called or the nurse asked for something or the patient had a question that you couldn't answer. Again, writing it down is important. We can't just rely on telling the person in the morning because like I mentioned earlier, we don't remember at least 40% of what we're told. So having it written down really helps make sure that things don't fall through the cracks. If you are in a place that's using paper handoffs, then it's important to remember that printed lists have a lot of PHI and they are a huge potential HIPAA violation. Before we converted to Caroline, we had handoffs like left everywhere in the nursing stations, on infection control cards, in our workrooms. So, and people would leave with them by mistake in their coats and in their pockets and in their bags. So just reminding people that handoffs and rounding lists should be thrown away in locked containers for shredding, should not leave the hospital, should not go anywhere. The last thing we want is for anything to get lost or leaked, and for a learner to get in trouble for that. Okay, so I will just spend just a few quick minutes sharing how we implemented this and some of our results. I think Bhavesh mentioned that he's on the line, and you're welcome to speak up, Bhavesh, at any point. But I'll go through this quickly and then open it up for questions. So we implemented first on only half of our medicine teams because we had 6 general med teams. So we implemented on half of them. And 8 weeks in, asked them a bunch of questions. And out of the 10 questions that we asked, these 4 were either statistically significantly different, or at least close. And these were ones that mattered. So this was comparing, the dark blue bar here is the prior handoff tool we had made within our EHR, but was paper-based, and comparing that to the new one that we had made that was largely digital. And what I find really interesting here is this old one I had made 10 years earlier. So it was one that people were, very familiar with, very comfortable with, and a lot of, familiarity with, whereas the new one they had only been using for 8 weeks. And, they felt like they were able to more efficiently manage their work. They thought it was safer. They were more satisfied with it, and they were more likely to recommend it to a colleague. So that was all good. Overwhelmingly, people felt it was very easy to use. So we just implemented with a 10-minute video to train people. And then of course we were available for questions all the time. But 4 out of 5 people report that it's helped them be more efficient and make decisions earlier in the day. And 3 out of 4 people say it has prevented errors in their own practice. So that to me is super, motivating or exciting, rewarding that, so many people really feel like it's prevented errors in their own practice while caring for patients. So we really had, out of all the tools that I've implemented, and I promise not all of them implemented like this. The first one was pretty good, but it only went live on about 5 different services. For the life of me, I couldn't get surgery to use it. The second one that we made in the EHR did get pretty widely adopted, but it was kind of like, let's just say you couldn't learn it in a 10-minute video. It took me an hour to 2 hours to teach people how to use it. Just not very intuitive. But this one really took off on its own and was picked up. Now we actually don't even train people at all. They just kind of learn it on the fly when they come into the hospital. But it's on all of the services, all of the different users. This graph is showing how many people or how many times people are logging in a week, separated by role. And what I love, besides the fact that it's kind of like a rainbow, is that it's very interdisciplinary. So we have a lot of usage by residents. We have a fair amount of usage by APPs, which actually, if you look at how many APPs we have in the health system, this is a much higher percentage of logins than the number of users we have. So they are very heavy users. And the nurses. So the nurses love looking at our handoff and our tasks, and it has drastically reduced how much they call us because, our note might not say why we ordered the C. diff, but our handoff does. And so when we order something, they can just look and say, oh, okay, I see why you ordered this. You're worried about XYZ, and then they don't have to worry about calling us. We built it originally as a handoff tool, but now I think I mentioned in the beginning that it really became more about workflow in general. So people use the platform while writing notes, during rounds, while pre-rounding, when they were off campus, and when they were on call. And then I love this one while they were talking to patients. So out of the ones who said, yes, I use it when talking to patients, we asked them, okay, are you using it at the bedside with your patients? And, about a third of the people were saying yes, they were actually updating their handoff at the bedside in the room when the patient was telling them something, or if they found something that needed to be updated. Most of them, or many of them, were using it to view the handoff. They were using it to review data, and then also to review data in response to patients' questions. So instead of having to say, well, I don't know what your CBC was, and I'll have to wait till I get back to the computer to look at it, they would just do it directly within the application. And many people were using it to actually show people their data. So the most common thing, and this is really when I meant, I think in the title in the program, it talks about wellness. This is the absolutely hands-on most rewarding part of working on this, is that the things that we hear from residents saying that we couldn't imagine working in a place without it. It's completely changed the quality of our work life. And honestly, why I left all of my academic roles to do this full time and try to bring it somewhere is because it really has been impactful for us. So that's it. Happy to answer questions. I'd love to hear from you and see if you guys have any questions. But I love to also learn from things that you're doing. What have you seen that's worked or not worked? And we only have 5 minutes, but you're welcome to text me or email me at any time or DM me on Twitter. And if you have any questions for me, even for specific things that you're doing, I'd be happy to answer them. So Katie's asking about the Epic handoff tool versus Caroline. I'm happy to answer how they're different, but Bhavesh, if you want to, I don't know if you want to speak, but otherwise I can talk about what the difference is.
Certainly. I'm Bhavesh. I'm one of the Rising Med Peds chief at Penn and CHOP. And so at Penn, we use Caroline, which is incredible. And then at CHOP, we use like the Epic handoff tool, which is good, but not nearly as good. I think what I really like about Caroline is having like this discrete text box that you can move to later, put at the nighttime tasks, instead of like having to copy and paste things and move them down. The other really nice thing about Caroline is it pulls in, at least for us, integrated with Epic, it pulls in vitals, labs, imaging, home meds, like inpatient meds. It even has like the emergency contact that's listed in Epic, and will primarily use it. I feel like a lot of us will use it on our phones, so it's really useful when you're going between patient rooms. And then I've even found it really useful when I'm like running to a rapid or a code. I know the patient's room, so I'm able to figure out a little bit about the patient before I even get to the room.
Yeah. Thanks, Bhavesh. I'm actually curious, how often do you get locked out of the Epic handoff tool? Like in read-only mode, does that happen to you at CHOP?
Yeah, if someone else is using it at CHOP, if someone else is in the handoff, then you can't actually access it, or you can't change it. You can access it and read it, right. Which that's another point about Caroline, is multiple people can mostly edit it, unless if you're trying to edit the exact same like free text box.
Yeah, exactly. So this was one of the things we heard all the time before Caroline, and in the prior tool we built in our EHR, which was Allscripts, was that people would get locked out all the time, number one. And so you could read it, like you said, but you couldn't edit it. And number two was there were character limits. And so people were hitting all of these character limits. Now, I have a lot of opinion about how much information should be in a handoff and whether you need to hit a character limit. But as a principle, I believe we should make it easy for people to do their work, and so character limits drive me nuts. The other thing is you can only edit the Epic handoff tool at a computer. So you can view it on Haiku. It takes a lot of clicks to get to each person's handoff tool in Epic, in Haiku. So it's not, you definitely can't look at it for everyone on your list at once. But if you want to make any changes, if you go back to a computer. So when we actually started building this version, our goal was to be paperless for handoffs, which I would say about 80% of our services are now paperless. And I mean, I was the first person that when I started, I was like, there's no way I can build a paperless handoff, like you're crazy. But we were able to, we had great developers that we worked with at Penn, and we were able to do it successfully. But yeah. Any other, have not paid attention to the chat.
I can answer some of the things.
Sure.
It looks like people are interested in whether or not it adds to the workload. I really don't think it does. It is, I guess, true in that there are tasks that are written in the progress note. I think oftentimes you've kind of heard those get just like carried forward, and it's oftentimes the intern and or the attending that are mostly looking at progress notes, and then the senior resident is the one trying to like make things happen in the background. So it's a way for everyone to be on the same page. And I don't think it adds to the workload. And then at least here, we're able to access it from our phones by logging in, like if we're on the Penn Wi-Fi, and then even outside of Penn, when we're at home, we're able to like log in through our VPN or whatnot, and are able to access the care line and see exactly what's been going on with patients, which is like something I do every day post call to try and see what was happening when I left.
I actually just got called by a surgery resident who is now at another hospital and had only ever trained at Penn using Caroline. And he was like, I just can't understand my patients as much. And it's a different way of organizing information. I'm kind of obsessed with documentation. As you can see, it's all I think and dream and breathe about is how do we make documentation better? How do we make written communication better? And, you know, I think that especially when you're dealing with complicated patients, you got to do it by problem, and you got to do it only once. And when we have to write the same thing in 1,000 different places, like in our problem list and in our progress note and our handoff and all these other places, we end up writing it incorrectly or inaccurately, or we don't update well. And so to your question, I'm not sure who asked about, is it more work? It's actually the entire purpose of how we designed it was to make it less work and trying to eliminate double documentation so that you only have to write things once. And I didn't show this in here because this was about handoffs. And I'd be happy to show anyone who's interested, but the way that like you actually can use it to generate your progress note, whether it's Epic or anything else, so that if I've already written out the problem, the plan, and the tasks of what need to get done, I don't want to have to write it again for my progress note. I just use it to feed into my progress note. Which is kind of provocative way of thinking about documentation. All right, well, it's 11. I'm happy to stay and answer questions. I have no idea if there's other things on the schedule. I imagine you guys have things you want to go to, but I really, really welcome any emails, comments, tweets. I love, you know, hearing about other people. If you're interested in researching or, you know, working on any of this with me, please reach out. And Bhavesh, I love the hands-on commentary from you, so I really appreciate you speaking up. Thank you.